Okay, conference. Before we start, we are going to be going through, and this is the order just so that you know, we're going to be taking motion 15, 16, and then emergency motion 1. Paul Whiteman would like 2 minutes to speak after that. Then emergency motion 2, emergency motion 3, which has got a short video to follow, before we hear from Paul Novak, who's joined us this afternoon, and then we'll get to closing remarks and the closing ceremony. We've got to finish by 5 o'clock because, as you may be aware, this is the room we're having the gala dinner in, so it's a hard stop for 5. So what that means is, for the next 5 motions, we are going to be reducing the 2-minute mic to a 1-minute mic, and I will be enforcing the bell. So please come up if you've got something to add to the debate, and we'll get through those things. So can we move on then to motion number 15, which is Vision for 21st Century Schools in Wales, and that's Karina, and seconded by Ruth Davis. And perhaps if speakers can make sure you're on the speakers' chairs, we can be as quickly and as efficient as possible. Thank you. Thank you, Karina.
Sorry, and I apologise because we seem to have hijacked this conference with our motions. It's the last one from us. Okay, so this is our motion around our 21st century schools in Wales. So you've already heard that we're on a radical reform journey within education. The vision of Welsh Government to devise a better education system to ensure continuous improvement for the benefit of every child in every school is one to be commended. And it's an incredibly exciting time for us. Schools have been given the autonomy to design a bespoke curriculum suited to their location and context. It provides an opportunity to reflect on the why of learning rather than the what. Schools can focus on the quality of pedagogy and, most importantly, place children and their well-being at the heart of everything they do. And it sounds fantastic, but unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. For many of us, it feels like a terrifying juggernaut careering ahead, leaving the wreckage of exhausted leaders and staff in its wake. It's a complex picture. On top of curriculum reform, there are other current reform agendas whose implementation require considerable training and culture change. That includes, as you heard already, our ALN reform. We have a 1 million Welsh speakers agenda in Wales, the post-pandemic recovery, and a review of the assessment and accountability measures to complement our curriculum reform. And further agendas keep coming. We have the rollout of universal free school meals, the reform of the school day and the school year, and a community schools agenda. Now, we're not against reform. Indeed, we really do agree with the need to change education and prepare our children and young people for future living needs of the 21st century. And NAHT Cymru supports reform where clear evidence base has been obtained and impact studies have been carried out to ensure reform benefits education outcomes for all children. It's essential that education reform also supports the well-being and development of the education workforce. Unfortunately, though, some of the latest reform ideas, such as the reform of the school day, seem to be more about vote winning rather than grounded in educational impact. Now, I should emphasise, we're not actually against looking at the school day. Many of our members have successfully changed to an asymmetric week. However, rather than following a consultation process, Welsh Government has emphasised and focused on extending the school day with little consideration to the educational and economic impact. Welsh Government need to allow schools the time and the space to get what we have underway right. There's so much potential in our new current reform agenda, but if it's rushed, watered down by continual barrage of further change, we're in danger of disaster. The core purpose of schools is to provide high-quality education for every child and young person. However, that core purpose is under pressure. Schools continually take on more and more to support their communities. For many families, schools are the only place that are open every day that will listen and help as pressure on other services increases. Our core purpose of schools has broadened without consultation. As a colleague who was recently opened a food bank at her school said to me, if we don't do it, who will? The never-ending commitment of school leaders never fails to amaze me. But I find it incredibly sad that this is where we find ourselves as schools of the 21st century. We believe a vision for 21st century schools that tackles the impact of poverty on educational attainment and achievement must include the wider support services. However, continued underfunding of these services is detrimental to school leaders, teachers, support staff, and crucially, our learners. More and more responsibility is being placed on school leaders to fix the problems of society, but it can't be left to schools alone. Without a doubt, our school leaders play a unique part in supporting the well-being and development of our young people and children. They have a critical role in reimagining and driving a vision for 21st century schools. We believe the best thing Welsh Government can do is to invest in our profession, to retain excellent teachers and leaders, and provide quality professional development to make sure they are equipped to provide high-quality teaching and learning. We want to be clear about the role and function of schools in the 21st century. Give us, and the services that support us, time, resources and funding to fulfil that vision. Conference, I ask you to move this.
Thank you, Karina. Sorry about that. Do we have any speakers for the 1 minute mic? No, we don't. In which case we will move to the vote. Thank you very much. Those in favour, would you raise your hand, please? Support this motion. Thank you very much. And those against? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Conference. Which moves us on to motion 16, reviewing government response to COVID, which is going to be proposed by Graham Frost and seconded by Patrick Foley. Thank you, Graham.
Colleagues, from the outset of the pandemic, educational professionals were correctly identified as frontline workers. There was no question that we would do as we always do, and stepped up to the mark and did our part. Communities depended on us. Other key workers depended on us. We mobilised, organised and adapted repeatedly, consistently and continually. But when you are on the front line, it is reasonable to expect timely instructions, usable guidance and advance warning of any changes to requirements from those who govern. What we received was anything but, often receiving new guidance late on a Friday evening, or instructions prior to a desperately needed break for school leaders, only to have contradictory instructions at the end of that break, which made futile the unnecessary intensive preparation we had already undertaken. And why? Because we had governmental indecision flip-flopping between scientific advice and other influences. This should be a significant part of the public inquiry. Communities and parents have expressed recognition for the way education professionals unflinchingly stepped up to the mark. But we are left feeling that the work we did and do, the pressures involved at the time, and the legacy it has left receives lip service only from the government. Educational professionals lost loved ones to the virus too, and some lost their health, and some even their lives. The very scant reference to schools and education in the draft terms of reference for the upcoming COVID-19 public inquiry does not even pay lip service and is little short of insulting. Colleagues, I move.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. During this conference, we've heard the opportunity... Sorry, I'm Patrick Foley, I'm Bromley branch and on the NEC. During this conference, we've had the opportunity to share stories about the pandemic and have learnt about the importance of recovery. It is important that we share our stories and our experiences of working during the pandemic and have the opportunity to do so at the inquiry, so that lessons can be learnt and so that we can what we did can be acknowledged, and so that these stories can be shared and recorded. I know of many school leaders who are heroes. In fact, we were all heroes during the pandemic, keeping our schools and the children in our care and our community safe in the most difficult of circumstances. These stories of our heroism must be heard as widely as possible, and at the COVID inquiry. We need to share our stories so that we can illustrate and show the need for the inquiry to be expanded to include what schools did and how we could have been better served and supported as essential service providers. Please use the time on the 1-minute mics left in the debate to tell your stories, and we must collect and share them as widely as possible, and especially at the inquiry. I second the motion.
Thank you, Patrick.
Ros Sendoric from Windsor and Maidenhead. I'm the branch secretary. Our president is a serving head. I'm retired. He rang me a few weeks into the beginning of 2010, and he was really, really upset. And he said, I've counted it, 176 different instructions from the government since this all started, and I just don't know what to do. And I think that it's really vital that we are part of this inquiry, because it wasn't just the NHS that supported this whole country during the pandemic. So I support this motion wholeheartedly.
Thank you.
Keith Wright, North West Region, National Executive. I had 2 waves during the time when COVID was supposed to be sort of gone, done and dusted. Unfortunately, the waves in my school, which affected at one point a quarter of the staff and several classes, led to me having to close classes despite the government saying I couldn't do, because I had no choice, I had no staff. And I wasn't prepared to do what they suggested, and share staff around the school just to spread the virus. But it cost me tens of thousands of pounds, but because I was outside of the window, I'm not allowed to claim any of it. For that reason, and also because my budget has been carefully planned so that we are sustainable. So we were stuffed, basically. So the one thing we're good at, aren't we, is teaching. And we hear this phrase so often, lessons will be learned, lessons must be learned. Okay, so the remit for us is that we must help children to know more and remember more. So let's help the government to know more and remember it full stop, so they don't have to keep relearning it. So I support the motion. Thank you.
Emily Prophet, Staffordshire Branch and National Executive. I just want to remind you all of a very difficult situation we were all put into in January 2021. We returned as a school on the first day in January. We didn't have an inset day. We went back to normal. We opened up. My staff were all in. My pupils were all in. At 8 o'clock that evening, we had a news briefing we had no knowledge of where the government were closing schools the next day. That is nothing short of incompetent. I had no time to prepare my staff, my pupils and my parents for the next day. We had to hold an emergency 8 o'clock Zoom meeting in our pyjamas to try and decide what we were going to do the next day. I fully support this motion.
Thank you, Emily.
Judy Kelly, Hampshire. The only reason we weren't stressed was that I never trusted the government in the first place. So I knew it was wrong, that we shouldn't be going back. I thought he was going to change his mind. So we had prepared on that day. But also, right from the beginning, I ignored everything the government said, because what I was following was the NHT advice. So what Ruth and everyone was doing back here, not in Telford, but what they were doing at the NHT headquarters, I had complete faith in, because in the 10 years I've been in the NHT, they're the ones that I would rely on. So I never, ever opened anything from the government. I only opened everything that came from the NAHT, and they explained everything and what we should be doing, and that's why we weren't too stressed, and we just carried on.
Thank you.
Duncan Spalding, Norfolk Branch. This is my first time NAHT Conference. I wholeheartedly support this motion. I think it's really important that we have a voice to try and understand the disproportionate impact that some groups, such as Us for Them and other people, had, leading to distrust around vaccinations, distrust around various processes that had to take place in our secondary schools, leading us to be bombarded with faux legal letters and threats of legal action and things like that, which was a great cause of stress for a lot of colleagues while you're trying to do the best things for your community. So I think it's really important that education features very strongly in this, because I think our voice and the voice of the expertise of associations such like this should hold greater weight than AstroTurf lobby groups and things like that. So I support this motion.
Thank you very much. Conference, I'm going to take this motion for the vote now. So please, can you raise your hand if you're in favour of this motion? And those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Conference. So that concludes the what was the scheduled programme of motions, and now we move into the emergency motions. So this next motion is emergency motion number 1, and that's proposed by Hildy Mitchell and seconded by Deborah Johnson. And after this motion, Paul Whiteman would also like 2 minutes to speak to Conference as well, once we have voted, though. And we'll do 1-minute mics after this, but please think about what you want to contribute to the debate on this motion. Thank you, Hildy.
Good afternoon, Conference. At last year's policy conference, I had the privilege to listen to the then new Secretary of State for Education make a direct address to us as school leaders. I actually found his address reassuring on 2 points in particular. Firstly, that he made a commitment to an evidence-based approach to developments in education. And secondly, his reassurance that there was no arbitrary timeline for schools being required to convert to academies. Now, to give you some context, I'm the head teacher of a successful local authority-maintained school in Brighton and Hove. As a city, we have very few academies, but a number of very strong and supportive school families. I'm a member of the Infant Heads Group and vice chair of a locality-based partnership which includes our 2 local secondary schools. We also have a vibrant maths hub, which many Brighton schools are involved in, and access to well-regarded and well-connected specialist leaders in education. At the moment, the support and challenge I get from these relationships meets the needs of my school. Like many of you, back in October last year, I was looking forward to returning my focus to curriculum development and school improvement after 2 years of operational firefighting during the pandemic. It was music to my ears that I might be able to concentrate on this without the distraction of being forced to invest time right now considering and consulting on the future structure of my school. So, fast forward to this year's conference. We are meeting again with a white paper for education that's hot off the press. And it's a white paper that seems at odds with what we were told. The commitment to being data-driven on at least some of the issues seems to have been abandoned. And we have been given a clear directive for all schools to be on that academy journey by 2030. Where is the evidence that the best way to ensure high-quality education is through a fully academised system? And where is the representation from the Department for Education who could help Conference understand this apparent turnaround? Last October, the Secretary of State told us he wanted to work through and with the people in the room. Well, we are back in the room. Where is he? Every day in my school, I engage in professional dialogue with my staff, my governors, and my colleagues. And as a result of this support and challenge, my leadership is enhanced and my children's outcomes improve. I believe we need to ensure this level of professional trust within the education profession as a whole to enable this to happen at a system level. And this includes between schools and the DfE. By our actions during the pandemic, school leaders have shown that we can be trusted to deliver an education, and now the DfE need to prove to us that we can trust them. We need the Department for Education to take all the opportunities they can to fully engage with school leaders on all issues impacting education, showing them the professional respect they deserve and have earned. Only by doing this can they help us understand their rationale for what's in the white paper and help us to deliver an education system of which we can all be proud. Conference, I move.
Deborah, you have just under 1 minute within your time allotted.
Deborah Johnston, South Central Regional Secretary. It is unacceptable that the government have not made a representative available for our annual conference. The profession has been assured that the government wants to engage with school leaders even when views differ. That assurance seems all the more hollow when we learn that the Secretary of State was in Telford yesterday, but not available to address conference. Secretary of State, we are angry and disappointed that you're not taking this opportunity to clarify important questions that we've got around the white paper and to engage in professional dialogue with us, something that you promised you would do in October 2021. On our behalf, we're now instructing the National Executive to invite the Secretary of State to their next available meeting so that a discussion about the apparent mismatch between previous understandings of government policy and the subsequent deviation can take place. I second this motion.
Thank you, Deborah. Okay, I see no one else waiting for a 1 minute mic, so I suggest we do take this to a vote. And then after the vote, I invite Paul Whiteman, our General Secretary, to address us. So let's have a vote. Those who are for the motion, please raise your hand. Thank you. And those against? That's carried unanimously. Paul.
Thank you, President, for this slight indulgence. Just a couple of things to say very quickly. 2 votes that require tellers and a card vote. Be careful what you wish for, I think, is what I'm coming back to on that one. And I won't get the opportunity again. One of the things that keeps General Secretaries awake at night is technical operations like that and thinking when it goes wrong, it goes very badly wrong. And I just want to thank my staff team for stepping up to the plate around that and making sure it was delivered well. But to the point I wanted to make, you've been upset at this conference that no one from government was available to come and see you. And what underlined that dissatisfaction was you discovered that the Secretary of State was in the same town as what was taking place. And that seems difficult to reconcile with the explanation. But that said, you've expressed that dissatisfaction, but you've also expressed in the motion by inviting the Secretary of State to meet with the National Executive Committee your commitment to an ongoing dialogue, an ongoing engagement with the government. And I'm very proud of you for doing that. We have to rise above the difficult nature of the relationship sometime because the issues are so very important that we can't deliver for you and we can't deliver for the young people in your care if we don't continue with that engagement. So I'm very proud that you've issued that invitation to the Secretary of State. And I say this to you directly, Secretary of State. Nadeem, we want to work alongside you. We want to work with you even when it's difficult and we disagree because we value what we can deliver on behalf of young people. And I very, very much hope you'll accept that invitation where I know you'll get a professional, warm welcome, robust debate that will enable us all to take things forward. So thank you, Conference, for that indulgence.
Thank you, Paul. That takes us on to emergency motion number 2, proposer Chris Gaffney and seconder Tim Gallagher.
Good afternoon, Conference. I'm Chris Gaffney from Staffordshire Branch, home to the Right Honourable Member for Lichfield, Michael Fabricant. In fact, I live within his constituency. And my school is just over the border in Rugeley, a hard-working ex-mining town in Staffordshire. As such, I am able to benefit as much as anybody else from his simply extraordinary leadership, insight, and deep thinking. However, in a professional context, I could not help but be taken aback by his statement of the 12th of April that during the pandemic we had tended to go back to the staff room for a quiet alcoholic drink. I was surprised to hear that whilst my staff put themselves in the direct line of an unknown deadly disease, abiding by the regulations set, colleagues everywhere else have been partying like it was 1999. I'd never even had the opportunity to be ambushed by a cake. And so I began to ask around to see where my invitation had gone missing. But it seemed that whomever I spoke to, in fact, no one seemed to have been invited to these staff room parties. What I actually heard was how school staff scrambled to overcome the deficiencies of government, how they reacted to information shared in the press before schools were even made aware of it, actions that were required within hours, launched on a Sunday and needed for a Monday. I heard about how schools were essential in providing food for the most vulnerable in our society, spending hours trying to navigate the flawed voucher system. How they created an entirely new virtual curriculum from scratch, spending hours engaging with children and ensuring the inevitable gaps in learning were minimised. I heard reports of tireless efforts to safeguard children, with staff visiting homes, supporting them to get into school where necessary, providing food and their own money to families in greatest need. Of how schools manage death and tragedy in their communities, supporting families in their grief and through trauma. Of how they selflessly sacrificed themselves by physically going to work, putting themselves in harm's way, continuing to ensure that the country could function by accommodating the children of key workers and the most vulnerable. They cared not for their own safety and took the risk of taking home this horrific disease to their own family because they saw it as their responsibility. I heard how leaders supported colleagues with the inevitable mental toll, staffed schools with the highest levels of absence in memory, after it was decided to just let that virus run through us. Finally, of leaders managing their own mental health whilst pushing ahead to repair the damage done by the pandemic, of them putting body and soul on line for our children. We stood and fought when we were needed most. We did it because it is our passion and because we are proud to be the lifeblood of our communities. We did it because we care. And so, I had to presume that the Right Honourable Member for Lichfield must be mistaken. Perhaps he confused our profession with his own. Or perhaps, more likely, this was yet another example of a Member of Parliament showing contempt for our trusted, moral profession. Another misplaced, disembodied soundbite to justify the behaviour of others. I note that Mr Fabricant, under duress, has written to our General Secretary and offers some clarification. He apologises if he has caused offence. I have lived long enough to spot a loaded apology when I see one. His error, he states, was in suggesting that everyone had done it. But if they did, then it would have been understandable, and that we should all have tolerance for those who have indulged in drinks after work. I cannot imagine to whom he may be referring with this message of support. Conference condemns the recent statement of the Honourable Member for Lichfield in stating teachers and nurses had alcoholic drinks at the end of a day's work in their staff rooms during the pandemic. Conference applauds the swift public intervention of the General Secretary. The subsequent apology issued by Mr Fabricant in response is welcome, but we note that the slur has not been withdrawn. All too often, we see baseless slurs and allegations made about the profession in an attempt to direct attention away from political failure. Conference resolves to publicly correct false impressions without fear or favour at every opportunity. Conference, Mr President, I move.
Thank you. Are you speaking to this moment? Oh, sorry. Have I got anyone speaking on the 1 minute mics? I get confused sometimes by age. Okay. In which case, we will move this to a vote. So could you raise your hands if you're in favour of this motion? Thank you very much. Could you raise if you're against? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Which takes us to our last motion, which is Emergency Motion 3, proposed by Dave Woods and seconded by Marika Miles.
Conference, Dave Woods, London Region and National Exec. One of the most streamed shows on Netflix over the past week is called Heartstopper. It's a young adult series based on the comic book novels of Alice Oseman set in a secondary school. All young people growing up deserve to have their school days reflected in films and TV they watch, the stories they read, and they have a right to see themselves as represented. School-based stories will always have a place in our world. They will always have a captive viewing audience. Heartstopper proves that today, just as Grange Hill and Press Gang proved in the past when many of us watched TV growing up. These stories of friendships with peers, issues with parents, exams, and let's face it, there's a heck of a lot of them in our schools, but that's another issue. Bullying, annoying, and sometimes at times out-of-touch teachers can guide young people through their own life experiences and can be a profound influence for good or ill on these people as they grow into adulthood. There is, however, a huge difference between the stories of Grange Hill and those in Heartstopper. 40 years of difference, in fact, and a very big, very welcome, and much needed societal change that allows authors and filmmakers to tell truer stories today, which include and represent the whole viewing audience. LGBT plus people were not represented in TV and films that most of us watched many years ago, nor in the stories many of us read growing up through our formative years. It was as if LGBT people just didn't exist, except very occasionally in short, done and then forgotten stories, which generally showed characters unhappy or as victims. The pernicious Section 28 legitimized this almost total erasure of LGBT characters, giving the wrong message that LGBT people didn't have the right to be who they are. LGBT plus young people weren't alone, but they often felt it. Our LGBT plus young people in schools today are here, and they're increasingly speaking out, proud with their diverse voices, but sadly, some people aren't. Some people have hid themselves, some have denied themselves, and some sadly learnt to hate who they were. And statistics tell us, and they still do, that tragically, many LGBT plus people don't actually make it to adulthood. Partly because they saw no positive role models, no positive stories in what they were watching or reading, and they had no supportive view, and some even thought they may have been abnormal. Conference here in 22, isn't it a wonderful thing that we've all moved on? Or have we? We have young adults reading books like Heartstopper, which tell stories of young queer people, their friendships, their exams, their parents, their struggles, and their schools. Stories in which they have equality and agency and happiness in their lives. Except occasionally we see reminders not everyone has moved on. Recently, an author was stopped from visiting a school because his books, young adult fiction, which happens to include some children who are gay, were deemed unsuitable. Simon James Green was not banned by the school, which had arranged the visit, not banned by the senior leaders in the school, who had championed the visit as part of delivering an inclusive curriculum, not banned by the governing body of the school, which supported the visit and recognised their duties under the Equalities Act, but this author was banned by the diocese, overseeing the school because it said the school cannot, under any circumstance, endanger the faith of pupils in their charge by presenting as good something which is condemned. What message does this send out to LGBT plus community in schools? To the pupils, the staff, the parents. It sends a message of intolerance, a harking back to those dark days of exclusion and invisibility, to that abnormality which many LGBT adults remember or try to block out from their own past experiences. Admirably, bravely, the teachers, senior leaders and governors were having none of this, and despite threats, stood up to the diocese, which promptly began to remove governors who had supported the visit and told the school there would be serious consequences in the weeks ahead. The legality of this action is in doubt, The morality of it is totally absent. NAHT, our sister unions, many members of the public through social media and letters have issued their unequivocal support statement for the school. NAHT's LGBT+ network, our national executive and national president sent further messages of solidarity. Our national secretary has visited the school to personally assure the staff NAHT will be there alongside them as this wrong is righted, as it must be. This motion asks us to ensure that National Executive uses all means to get the Secretary of State to investigate the actions of the diocese and the continued attempts to ignore and override statutory guidance in its treatment of staff and governors. Above all, it asks us to take one of these key words and stand in solidarity with the staff and governors of John Fisher School, who recognise, value and celebrate the humanity, the rights and the lives of young LGBT+ people in their community. Earlier this morning, Sinead reminded us of how ideal our country might be if our national leaders were more like the fictional President Bartlett from the West Wing. Sadly, they are not. But it made me recall two of my favourite quotes. Decisions are made by those who show up, and never ever doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Conference, we are here. We have showed up. Our current government has sent nobody to listen. They have not showed up to discuss, to listen, and to hear our concerns. As NAHT members, we are that thoughtful group, but we are not small. We are large and we are growing, and we are committed union members who can change the world, as that is what we do every single day in our schools. Support this motion, support John Fisher School, and send the strongest message of solidarity as we change the world together. Conference, I move.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. We've got people to speak. If we could come up to the mic, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, it's 1 minute.
That's right. Okay, I will be really quick. I had no intention of speaking. I have not been this scared since I was an NQT doing my first assembly, and my watch keeps pinging that my heart's about 110. I have to support this. I was at a school where we had the protesters around teaching the Equality Act and LGBT, and I have to be honest, the only people who had our backs were the NAHT. So if it comes to standing in solidarity with a school on this issue, I had to just say I absolutely support them and we have to stand by them. That's it.
Thank you.
Sorry, I haven't prepared anything at all, but feel so strongly to get up and support this motion. I'm Gary Tucker. I'm from Somerset branch. I'm a member of the LGBT community and head of a primary school, and out with the whole community, and it's a Church of England school as well. I've had such a welcome, and rightly so. I utterly condemn what this has been going on here. I've watched Heartstopper, and it is absolutely positive. It's an uplifting tale. I could have done with that all those years ago, you know, to make me not feel so abnormal. You know, things could have been quite different for me if that sort of thing had happened then. What this is happening here is it sets a dangerous precedent, you know, to be opposed to this sort of thing, and children need this sort of support. So I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you.
I'm Clive Leach from the Worcestershire branch. My feeling as far as the action is concerned of the Archdiocese here is best described, or actually signed, by the word contempt. If you could do that for us. A smell that we want to throw away. This action is not the faith I hold. As a Christian, it is not as Christ, as I understand him, would hold. He stood by those who were different, yet part of humanity, showing compassion and solidarity. That is my faith as I understand it, but it is not as demonstrated here. Therefore, I say once again...
Thank you.
Emily Prophet, Staffordshire Branch and National Exec. I think you're getting used to that by now. I'm going to say one thing quite simply. I urge you all now to get to your feet and stand in solidarity for our colleagues at a school that are being completely treated incorrectly. Please, colleagues, stand and join me now in celebrating our colleagues at John Fisher.
Colleagues, we will take this to a vote. If you are in favour of this motion, please raise your hand. And those against? That's carried unanimously. We've also got a very special video to show you now from the staff at the school. So if we could play that, please, on the screens.
Hi everyone, I hope you're having a great time at the conference. Sorry we can't be there with you. The senior leadership team at the John Fisher School want to pass on their sincere thanks to the NAHT for all the work they are doing to try and support the situation the school finds itself in through no fault of its own.
I'm sure you're now all aware of Ofsted's view on the matter. We belong to a great school, but the governance is in disarray. The events over the last 7 weeks have placed a tremendous strain on our community.
The school really wants all of its students back in school and our parents to be able to focus on what matters most, the education of their children.
We want to say a particular thanks to Rob Kelsall and Paul Smith at the NHT for all that they are doing, both of whom visited the school this week. We know they are working hard in conjunction with the other professional associations to move things forward.
Finally, thank you for bringing this motion to the conference. The school hopes that this can help continue to stabilise the governance of the school. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Brilliant. That's excellent. Thank you. I'm now going to invite Paul Whiteman, our General Secretary, to introduce our guest, Paul Novak. Clap it in.
Wow. Thanks, President. Paul Novak, Deputy General Secretary of the TUC, you're very welcome to our conference. Paul and I have known each other for a while. We've both been around the trade union movement a bit. Paul first came into the trade union movement as a full-time official rather than an elected official in 1998 when he joined the fledgling TUC Organising Academy as the TUC was beginning to establish its commitment again to the strength of mutual endeavour and the power of looking after one another rather than just looking at individual support for individual members. He's a passionate advocate on behalf of working people, and I have watched with admiration as I see Paul balance very difficult competing interests within the movement, and you balance those very, very well. The only thing that I do have to take issue with Paul over is that he's an Everton fan. And all I will say to you, Paul, as a Crystal Palace season ticket holder, he's 3-1 in December, 4-0 in the FA Cup, and hopefully we'll make it a hat-trick on the 19th of May. But let's not let that get between us. You're very welcome at conference, and we look forward to what you have to say. You're very welcome, Paul.
Well, I was going to say thank you, Paul, for those kind words of introduction, but I'm not sure. I'm not going to rise to the bait on the Everton stuff. President Conference, first of all, just let me say it is a huge pleasure to have the opportunity to say a few words today, to build on the close links between the TUC and the NAHT, links that we've built up over the last 7 years that the association has been affiliated to the TUC, and above all, to be here in person with you at your conference. I've said at previous NAHT events, the absolute best part of my job is the opportunity to go out and talk to trade union activists and members, to listen to the issues and concerns that matter to you, and to your members. And since I've been at the TUC, I've had the privilege to go out and talk to union members, whether it be in nuclear power stations, in supermarkets, in universities, in colleges, in airports, and of course at conferences like this. Now, the last couple of years, it hasn't been quite as much fun. All of that interaction has been done on Zoom or Teams from my shed at the bottom of the garden in Birkenhead. It's an absolutely lovely shed, but it is much better to be out talking to people face to face. And I'm really looking forward to the event. I've enjoyed the debate so far. I'm really looking forward to maybe a few drinks and the meal tonight at the gala dinner as well, something which Paul Whiteman has assured me absolutely 100% is a genuine work-related event and not a microfabricant-style work-related event. In the danger of being the Mutual Appreciation Society, I do want to pass on my congratulations to Paul on his re-election as your General Secretary. As Paul said, we've known each other for nearly 25 years now, actually, Paul. When I started work at BIFU, the Bank Workers Union, Paul was an activist in Lloyds. And I have to say, as a new young organiser, a Scouser parachuted into the Southwest, working in a sector I knew very little about, in a union that I was completely new to, Paul, right from the start, was what he always is, actually. He was kind, he was friendly, he was open, he was supportive, and he's been a proper friend and colleague ever since. So thanks for that, Paul. But also as a member of our General Council, thanks for all the work that you do on behalf not just of your union, but education unions collectively in the TUC. You are, I know, someone who's got a huge amount of credibility with your peers in the trade union movement, but also with education policy makers, civil servants and ministers. So, Paul, thanks for everything that you do on behalf of the NHT, but for the TUC as well. I also want to pay tribute to your presidential team. Tim, I know, has led the charge on teacher and school leader well-being during his presidential term. In fact, I understand he's done so well that he's been asked to stay on for another 4 months. I don't know how you feel about that, Tim, and what that means for your mental health, but I'm sure it's a good thing for the NAHT. And your president, your incoming president, Paul Gosling, can I just say, when I walked to the venue today and I saw those themes, compassion, humanity, solidarity, I was genuinely inspired. I can't think of better themes for a trade union conference, because they are 3 values that are at the heart of our movement, and 3 values that I think, frankly, are in short supply sometimes in this world, and certainly in our politics. So I really look forward to seeing those values continue to shape the work of the NHT. We've just seen it, haven't we, in that response to Emergency Motion 3. That is compassion, humanity, solidarity in action. So, Paul, congratulations on that brilliant theme. Let me just say a few words of thanks to everybody in this hall as well for everything that you do in your branches, in your schools and in your communities, speaking with authority about what is needed to make education work, battling for fair and decent funding for every school, and putting the interests of children and young people first. Day in, day out, your profession makes a difference. You make a difference. Being a school leader is not just about giving every child the education they deserve. It is about dealing with the debilitating effects of child poverty. It is, as we've just talked about in Emergency Motion 3, tackling racism, sexism, homophobia, making schools safe and supportive places for every young person in the way it should be. And it is about welcoming those children fleeing places like Afghanistan and Ukraine and giving them some safety and solace. The work you do is difficult and demanding, but it is also life-affirming and life-changing, and that giving every child from every background the best possible start in life. Now, I said your job is a challenging one. I can't think of a time when it's been more challenging to be a school leader. We've had a decade of austerity and what that's meant for school funding. We've had changes in the national funding formula, which have disadvantaged schools in the most deprived areas the most. And we seemingly, even for somebody that's looking in from the profession, from the outside, who isn't an expert in education, a series of never-ending reforms and initiatives which cause massive disruption, quite often for precious little progress. And of course, we had the pandemic. And again, I know you've just talked in your emergency motions about that COVID inquiry. Think about the work that you and your members did during the course of the pandemic over the last 2 years. And it doesn't matter whether it was keeping schools open for the children of other key workers, or running homeschooling, new virtual learning, or working to make our classrooms as COVID secure as possible. Our school leaders, your staff teams, did this country proud over the last 2 years of the pandemic. So it's about time that the government did right by you and by the whole school workforce as well. Because you can't have year-on-year budget cuts, real terms pay cuts, downward pressure on pensions, ever-increasing workloads without having an impact on staff morale, without having an impact on recruitment of staff and on staff well-being. Over the last decade, your pay has been hammered in 15% in real terms. Pay differentials have been steadily eroded, making it difficult to attract people to make that step up. And the staff that you manage have been hit hard as well by rising prices and falling wages. Teachers, a 19% pay cut since 2010. Many deeply concerned about their personal finances. Some teachers taking second jobs just to get by. Who seriously believes this is the way to treat one of our most important professions in what is still one of the richest economies in the world? So we've reached a crunch point, I think, for head teachers and school leaders. We've reached a crunch point for the wider school workforce. Frankly, we've reached a crunch point for working people up and down this country, right across the public and private sector. Energy bills this year will rise 14 times faster than wages, 14 times faster than the money our members get every month. Inflation set to surge to nearly 10% later this year. And for far too many of the people that we represent in the TUC, work is no longer the way out of poverty. In fact, low-paid, insecure work is trapping people in poverty and meaning that they're reliant on support from the welfare state. You see the consequences of that every day, whether it's kids whose families are struggling to make ends meet, families that are reliant on the food bank, kids coming into school tired, hungry, because their parents can't afford to feed them properly or put on the heating or buy a decent bed. That simply isn't a tenable state of affairs going forward for our country. And that's why at the TUC, working with unions like yours, we are demanding that the government do more. We want less rhetoric about levelling up and more real practical action to support working people and their families. So we've called on the Chancellor to go back to his spring budget to try again and frankly to do a better job. We want to see an emergency budget that will deliver a proper living wage and fair pay agreements, decent sick pay and a boost to universal credit, a windfall tax on the big energy companies who are making profits they haven't seen for decades, and also the equalisation of capital gains tax with income tax, because we all want to see more money for the NHS, more money for education, more money for social care, but we need to raise that money with taxes on wealth and not taxes on working people. And we need a proper reward for public sector workers who got us through the pandemic. So today, I want to echo the calls that you've previously made to call on the School Teachers Pay Review Body to assert its independence and to do the right thing, to end the pay freeze and restore real-term salaries to 2010 levels without delay, to restore pay differentials and address the persistent gender pay gap, and to deliver the decent real-terms pay rise that head teachers deserve. And it doesn't matter whether it's education or it's health, it's other parts of the public sector or indeed the private sector. And TUC is very clear that working people in this country need change. I mentioned the levelling up agenda and the government's aspirations to level up the country. I just want ministers to understand that you can't level up unless you also level up the world of work. We know that our members' priority is good quality, secure, well-paid employment, decent skilled work with high labour standards. That's the aspiration. What do we get in reality? Well, we get the spectacle of a situation like P&O. 800 workers sacked without notice, without consultation, with no moral qualm at all by their employer. 800 workers, members of 2 TUC unions, Nautilus and the RMT, who were replaced directly by agency workers on poverty wages, even below the level of the national minimum wage. Something that was unbelievable, unjust, and even by the company's own admission, unlawful. P&O has to be a turning point on workers' rights in this country, because if P&O can get away with it, every employer can get away with it, and no job and no worker will be safe. So that's why at the TUC, we've called on the Prime Minister to deliver the employment bill that he promised 2 years ago, because failing to deliver that bill, failing to tighten Britain's employment legislation will be a kick in the teeth for working people and a godsend to bad employers who frankly don't need any more incentive. Now, the government says it hasn't got the parliamentary time to introduce stronger rights for workers. Ironic, they found parliamentary time to implement the so-called unfinished business from the Trade Union Act of 2017. But if politics is genuinely about priorities, it's about time the Prime Minister prioritised his promise to extend and enhance employment rights after Brexit. Now, the TUC, like the NAHT, is not affiliated to any political party. I'll be honest, I've been active in the trade union movement for 30 years, and I've argued the toss with governments of every single political persuasion. When New Labour got it wrong with PFI, we told them clearly they got it wrong with PFI. When they opened the door to private sector providers in the NHS, we warned them they were making a mistake. And so too with this government, because our job in the TUC, I think our job in the trade union movement, is to represent working people truthfully, to hold the government of the day to account, and to speak that truth to power. And that's why we'll call out the government, any government, when it doesn't deliver for working people. And this government is not delivering for working people, and this Prime Minister and this Chancellor are not delivering for working people either. These are, we know, tough times for the people that we represent. I can't think of a precedent in my lifetime where we've had what we're living through now. We've had Brexit, we've had the global pandemic. Now, of course, we have the catastrophe in Ukraine, something I know that Paul spoke to the conference about yesterday, a brutal war which has killed thousands, displaced millions. Our movement is clear. It is always ordinary working people and their families who suffer the worst consequences of war. And that's why we've called on the government, and our unions have called on the government, to support all refugees fleeing conflict, whether they're from the Ukraine or Yemen or Afghanistan or anywhere else, to get tough on Russian money laundering, including those on so-called golden visas, which fund too much of our party politics, and to support by every means possible a peaceful resolution to the conflict. And just so that you know, practically as well, we're also working through the international TUC to provide humanitarian aid to unions and their members in Ukraine, and difficultly trying to find ways to bridge the gap between unions in Ukraine and unions in Russia, because those values that are being displayed today of compassion, humanity and solidarity are global trade union values, and they don't stop at any country or national borders. President, I'm conscious of the time. There's lots that I could talk about. I'm going to have an opportunity to. I will be in and around the dinner tonight, so if people want to hear about the work that we're doing on net zero, trying to get to good green unionised jobs, or the work we're doing on making sure that working people benefit from new technology and digitalisation, on trade agreements, on the work that we are doing on learning the lessons from the pandemic and holding the government to account on the public inquiry, just to say very clearly, we've already made it clear to the government in our submission to the terms of reference on the inquiry that education should be one of those featured sectors in the inquiry. What more we are doing collectively to build a more representative, more inclusive, diverse movement, absolutely essential in any union. But maybe just let me finish, President, on this point, because I am clear that if we're going to make progress on head teacher pay, on funding or fair school funding, on decent employment rights, on net zero, on trade that works for working people, on getting justice for those who lost their lives through government inaction on COVID, the best way of delivering on all those objectives and more is to build a strong, representative trade union movement, one that does unite head teachers and supermarket workers, or care workers, or those working in our finance sector, one that unites men and women, black and white, gay and straight, and one that actually celebrates and recognises the full diversity of working people in this country. Because when we do work together, when we do pull people together, we're a formidable force. I know, just look at the last 2 years, there would have been no furlough scheme, which at one stage was supporting the incomes of 12 million families in this country. There wouldn't have been a furlough scheme in this country without the trade union movement. It was unions that kept millions of people safe at work throughout the pandemic, whether they were working in classrooms or factories. Unions that are starting to reach out to organise young workers in companies as diverse as Uber and Ryanair, and unions that, despite all of the pressures that we've been through over the last few years, have grown for 4 consecutive years in a row, just as your union has grown. So strong unions are essential. I've got one final plea before I finish my remarks. On the 18th of June, the TUC's General Council, of which Paul is a member, has called a national demonstration in central London, demanding action on the cost of living, demanding a decent pay rise for all and a new deal for working people. I'll be there. Paul will be there. Don't let that put you off. We want everybody in this room, if possible, be there with us on June the 18th. Let's spread that word in our workplaces and communities. Let's make it the biggest mobilisation we've seen for years. Tens of thousands of people on the street to demand change, to celebrate trade unionism, and to stand up for those values of compassion, humanity and solidarity. Together we win the change that workers need, whether they're head teachers, whether they're supermarket workers, whether they're care workers. One big united trade union movement family. Join us on June the 18th. Thank you.
Paul, thank you. I can't think of a better way to close the conference. So thank you very much for those words and tying into the theme of the conference there. They were deliberately chosen for the exact reasons that you articulated. We are very, very proud to be part of the TUC and our growing and deepening relationship with you. And I'm sure that we'll see more of you, not only tonight, but in future at conferences and other events that we're taking part in alongside our sister unions. Thank you very much for coming, Paul. Thank you. Well, conference, we are at the final hurrah. And school seems to be following me around. There's always a raffle that needs pulling, isn't there? So before I get into the serious bit of the thank you, I am pulling the raffle. Apparently that's what I'm doing. Maybe I should leave it to the guests. I'm not looking and I'm not in the game. So unless this is Gosling, we should see who's won. It is the Raffle Prize. Hilary Goldsmith, the Judd School. I don't know what you do with that, Hilary. Someone will sort you out, I'm sure. So there we are, the raffle. Is there a meat raffle as well? There usually is in Devon. Someone wins half a pig for the freezer. Well, as I said, it was so good to hear Paul. Paul stole a lot of my thunder, actually. Paul Novak. It's getting very confusing up here for a number of reasons. In terms of linking in what's been going on in this conference, you know, we have really seen through some of the motions, with the motions and the talking about refugee crisis, yes, in the war in Ukraine, and refugees before that have been coming to this country for centuries, and how badly some refugees are being treated, particularly sort of in the migrant crisis that's been going on for a few years now, and the disgusting state of what this government's doing to people and sending them to Rwanda. Anyway, we're showing our support and our compassion, and we've seen a lot of humanity as well from the floor, people coming up. It's been great. We have had debate, which has been excellent. It sometimes is lacking in some of the things that we do, but it's been great that we've had it, and it has caused some controversy, and we probably need to put our arms around each other and have one of those hugs that Sinead was talking about if we've disagreed over things today. But that's democracy, and that's what we should be doing. It's really vital. And you know, the solidarity there shown at the end. We are part of an organisation that not only encompasses working people in this country, but also around the world. And it's very important that we are part of that and link with everybody. So thank you for everyone who's contributed, coming up and adding to that sense of those themes. I'm going to do some more thank yous now. I'm going to thank Tim. I was going to write a longer speech than this, but our lunchtime was a bit disrupted by things going on. So I'm sure there'll be more opportunities to say goodbye to Tim, because he's not going far for a while. But be as we are at conference, Tim, your focus during your presidential year on the well-being of teachers and school leaders was timely, taking place after 2 years of some of the most challenging times that I've known during my 30 years in education. You encouraged us all to make the time to invest in our own well-being so that we could better meet the needs of our pupils in our care and the staff in our schools and the people in our communities. Tim, I'd like to thank you for your excellent chairing. I've learned a lot from some of the chairing today is because I've learned from Tim and some other people in this room. Our policy conference in October was excellent, and we've built on that with this conference over the last couple of days. You're always so calm and so thoughtful, but he also knows when it's appropriate to inject a little levity into situations. The focus of the last 2 days has been on compassion, humanity and solidarity. And Tim, you're an embodiment of these noble ideas. So on behalf of all NHT members, national executive members, regional and branch officials, I would like to thank you for your term as president of our illustrious union. Thank you, Tim. I'm also going to thank some members of the executive who have left us during the course of the year. They include Sally Hampson, Sally Pearce, Julie Simpson, Nigel Bailey and Adam Robbins. So can we give them a round of applause, please? Thank you. I'd like to thank Tim and I we would have been bumbling around last night and not knowing where to go, and Amanda has looked after us. Amanda Holmes looked after us amazingly, getting us to the right places, but also the whole of the National Officer team. She has been looking after our needs and making sure we're in the right place at the right time. So Amanda, thank you very much, wherever you are. Where are you, Amanda? Probably doing something for us. Give her a round of applause. Thank you, Amanda. We have a little something for you later. You'll have to come and find me at the end of the conference. Thank you. The West Midlands, who have been the officials and helped steward the event. It's always fallen to you recently. We'll have to come to another region sometime. But thank you so much for your stewarding and all that you've been doing. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you, West Midlands. I've got to say, you know, Telford, the Telford International Centre here always make us feel so welcome, and they provide so well in terms of the food, and the staff here make us, you know, look after us very, very well. So for all the people working in Telford International Centre, right the way through, those that are going to be moving furniture and cleaning up after we make a mess tonight, we say, and those that are looked after, a big thank you to all those people working here. Thank you. We've got our AV team. I think it's been almost faultless. Thank you, AV team. You've done a great job meeting all of our requirements, and videos been playing at the right time and being seen in the hall. So a big thank you to our AV team. Give us a wave. Our BSL interpreters, who it's a really hard job. Thank you. They must be exhausted. They must be exhausted. Listen, last but not least, the staff at NHT who have been tested beyond what they were expecting. On the build-up to this conference, I have weekly meetings, or bi-weekly, and it gets weekly meetings, and the amount of work that goes on, not only the people in the room, but people who aren't here that have contributed to the paperwork, making sure things run smoothly, that people are well briefed and well informed. There's a huge, we are so lucky with the team that we employ at NHT. We've got some very smart, we've got some very hard-working people. So I'd just like to make sure we give them a massive round of applause, please. I have got some messages, but I think Simon's just got something to say.
Yeah, Paul, on behalf of Conference, I just want to say a big thank you for your brilliant work over the last few days. Your speech got us off to an absolutely inspirational start, and you articulated so well the values of compassion, humanity and solidarity. And secondly, your grace under pressure. I can't remember a conference where we've had a card vote and an unfriendly motion, and you were brilliant the way that you handled that. Paul, our union is in really good hands over the next 16 months. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Well, I'm going to formally close the conference, but then I am going to do the messages and things to remember. So I'm going to formally close the conference, and I get to keep this this hammer with and the or gavel. What's it called? Anyway, it's something for me to remember. I'm not sure where I'm going to put it, but there we are. You've got yours on the mantelpiece, have you? In the conservatory. So I officially close the conference. There we go. There we are. Thank you very much. Conference closed. Now we get on with the festivities, I suppose. Let me just make sure I've got my list. A couple of things. Make sure you've got your ID somewhere in case you can't get into the conference centre and have to return to your room when you're coming across in your finery tonight. Remember the message about the car park. Don't leave your car there. You'll be locked in. So move the car to the hotels. Take all your possessions in a moment when we leave the room. We've got a hard finish at 5. It's 5 to 5, so I'm doing well. Don't shout, Crackerjack. We'll take all of your things. Yes, I'm showing my age. Take all of your things out of the room, and then we can get the room turned around for this evening. I'm just checking. Remember the reminder from our General Secretary yesterday about social media and what we post on there. Please, we don't want anything that might cause some extra work over the bank holiday weekend for our General Secretary. Tonight, it's a 7 o'clock drinks reception for an hour. I think it's in the room just where we had the exhibition just down here. And then for 8 o'clock, we are in the room. I got to thank eTeach, who are providing some free drinks, 2 free drinks at the drinks tonight. So thank you very much to eTeach. I think they need a round of applause for that. Thank you. And then, a little bit unusually, we'll be having a few drinks and then coming into the hall. We're going to try and, I think Mark is going to try and get our silence. We've got one of our other sponsors, Canterbury University, just want to speak to us for a short while we're sitting at our tables, maybe looking at the wine before we can pour it out. And then Mark will get us quiet, and I'll do a toast, and then we'll get on with the gala dinner. So have a great night. I expect to see most of you on the dance floor if you're going to be there. Conference, thank you very much.